But first, let's get into it now. The Coalition today announcing it will oppose the government's legislation to cap international students at 270,000 from next year. The bill's been labelled by the Coalition as chaotic and confused, the opposition declaring they've got no confidence the government's capable of fixing its immigration mess. The number of foreign students in Australia has almost doubled from 470,000 in May of 2022 to more than 800,000 today, with recent ABS data showing that net overseas migrations now on track to exceed 1 million people in Labor's first 2 years in office. For more on this, I'm joined now by Shadow Minister for Immigration and Citizenship, Tehan. Dan, thank you for your time. I'll move on to the wider issue of uncontrolled migration in a moment, but on this bill, what's stopping you from being able to support it?
Well, it's just not going to fix the problem, Peter. As you've said, and we've seen a doubling of the number of international students here in Australia. Our research points to the fact there is over 1 million people here now who either are on international student visas who came here or on international student visas. And this is in a housing and rental crisis. This bill was doing nothing about secondary visas, so the partners who come here with those international students. Now that's blown out to over 120,000, and 86% of them are now seeking a way to stay here. They've been asked to reform the points test, which is encouraging people to stay here as well who come here on temporary visas. The whole thing is such a mess that one bill, and this bill in particular addressing one issue, just is not going to address the problem which has reached such a magnitude. So we want to make sure that we've got a suite of policies that we will put to the Australian people to deal with this. And one of the other things that we'll do is we'll make sure we consult with regional universities, with the private education providers, to make sure that there's proper consultation with them, because everything this government is doing is all about bringing more and more people, in particular to Melbourne and Sydney, and adding to this housing and rental crisis.
Dan, what would your alternative be? Because I know you've said you're concerned about these student numbers, fair enough. You're also concerned about border numbers across the board, net overseas migration, despite all those commitments from the government that they would bring these numbers down. They are not bringing them down. What's the Coalition's solution?
Well, we will look at student caps, we will look at the secondary visas, we will look at the points test, we will look at what we need to do to make sure that the majority of temporary visa holders come to this country, study and then leave. And we will make sure that what we do doesn't mean that if you apply pressure in one way, it then leads to all these unintended consequences in another, which is what the government is doing. They have failed to put a holistic approach together to be able to deal with this. And that's why, for instance, we've seen the amount of people claiming asylum continuing to rise at levels we haven't seen. We're seeing those who are here on international student visas claiming asylum. Those numbers are starting to increase. If you don't address this in a holistic issue, all you do is take the mess that you've created in one part and put it in another part, and the pile just continues to get bigger. And that is what we're going to see under this government, sadly, because they have no proper plan to address it.
After that High Court decision, the one that said you can't put an ankle bracelet or you can't monitor or apply a curfew to any of these foreign criminals now out on the street, the government said, look, we'll put some legislation in, some emergency legislation. Have you seen that legislation yet? Have you had a briefing? Have you seen legal advice? Because we know what happened last time they had this emergency legislation. They got it through this time last year. They've not used it once. What can you tell us?
So we've had a briefing and we've asked to see the legal advice, because you're absolutely right. Everything that this government has done so far has been completely and utterly botched. We've been given assurances, and those assurances have then turned out to be completely false. So we have asked to see legal advice. We have asked for there to be a short Senate inquiry so that we can look at this to make sure that what the government has proposed isn't another disaster. So my hope is we'll see that happen quickly this week. We would like to see this bill pass the parliament in this fortnight, but we want to make sure that they've got it right. And that's why, once again, we want to do the work that they seem to fail to want to do, and that's to make sure it will actually make a difference. Because at the moment, there is 224 hardened criminals running around this country without ankle bracelets, without curfews, and who knows, sadly, what they might be up to. And once again, we're not seeing any urgency from the government on this. I would have thought that we would have seen from them and heard from them that we would have a rapid Senate inquiry and we would have a clear timeline as to when they would want to pass this bill. But the fact that there are 224 hardened criminals out there just doesn't seem to concern them, sadly.